Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Expanding the Conversation with Kofi and Richard. Um, Today we're gonna talk about the art of solving problems. Kofi has dubbed himself a problem solver,
Oh,
engineer, process specialist, uh, and all the other skills needed to solve problems. So Kofi's gonna help us today talk about how do we solve our problems. But I guess life is most of the things that we're trying to do and achieve and accomplish um, is a problem to be solved, right? I would assume. I
hmm
remember one of the things, Kofi, that I enjoyed the most when I learned math was subject of the formula, right? If you
yeah.
got a missing piece, how do you
hmm
move the parts around so that you could find that missing piece? I love
Right.
that equation. Shout out to Sir Dolphin, the best math teacher ever. But I remember learning that, and I was like, "Wow, this is cool." And I feel like it's a helpful skill to develop, and of course, there's some basics I think one needs to have in order to think in a problem solving way, right? Because problem solving is more than just a doing thing, right? It's like your brain's gotta activate and get to work and pull from all the things that you know to
Yeah.
solve problems. But I will try to fill in my little pieces, but I hand it over to you, Dr.
No, no, no,
Dalrymple, as
don't,
you
don't
know,
do it like that. I mean,
as this as the specialist here.
I think you introduced it nicely because um, I think a lot of people miss the point of math sometimes, right? Because everybody complains about, oh, math might be difficult. I don't have a mathematical mind, and so on.
I'm not good with numbers.
Right, right. But a lot of the times it's not so much the numbers, but it's the way of thinking, right? It's the logical approach to solving this problem that you're given, and you sort of look for the missing piece, like you said, and then you start thinking about how you're going to fill in the blank, right? How you're going to deal with that. So it's that logical sort of process that math helps us to sort of do. And I really wanted to encourage people to listen into this one because I think this is important because you pointed out how important it is for us to solve problems. So recently, I was in an electronics store and I bought um, a shop vac. Well, it wasn't a full size shop vacuum. It was actually one for the car, and so it had the so we saw the cigarette lighter connection, right? And so I had this idea because I kept looking for a shop vac and I couldn't find the one. The ones I was looking at was too big. I wanted something cheap because I really wasn't going to use it for a long time because we were doing some small construction work at the office. And so I thought I'd get something real quick and cheap, and it wasn't much. And so I got to thinking that I'll wire it up, instead of plugging it into the car, I'll wire it up to one of these DC adapters that go from like 110 to 12 volt, right? So I walk into an electronics store and this young lady, Vanessa's her name. I started asking some people to tell me to go over there, and I started talking with her, and she started this high level sort of technical conversation with me about amps and voltage. And I'm looking at her and I said, "Are you an engineer?" She says, "No," and I was like, "I need to get you in the engineering program, right?" I was very impressed with her, and so I walked with her and we had this conversation, and she started talking, and at the end of it, we're going like toe for toe, and and so she starts telling me, yeah, I've got this adapter, I could do this. And I come back in and I'm cutting the wire and she's like wiring it up. I'm telling her what I'm going to do. She totally gets it. We get the amperage matched up and everything. At the end of it, she like solves this. So I said to her, like, what do you do? And she says, I know. I asked her, are you going to go do engineering? And she said she's not sure. She wants to do medicine. I said, what do you like doing? She says, I just like solving problems, right? And I'm like, no, that's my tagline. I was like, that's my tagline. And so I thought how think about how problem solvers make the world an easy place. Think about how better our lives could be if we figured out how to solve the challenges, right, that confront us. And I think that's why, in my view, Richard, this conversation is so important, right? So what I want to lead off with is is there a way, is there a logical way to solve a problem, right? So when you are confronted with a problem or a challenge, is there a way? And the first thing I want to say, yes, there is. There is a logical way to go about solving a problem. And for people listening, there's a couple. I call it. It's generally called. I call it DMIAC, right? But the first one is define. The first thing you got to do is define the problem. You can't solve a problem if you haven't defined it, right? You have to know what are the boundaries of this problem. What is the issue? How many times, Rich, does an issue come up and we're trying to solve it? Like, but what problem are we solving? How do we know at the end of the day that we have actually solved what the problem is, right? And so it's really important. It doesn't matter whether it's math or it's a personal issue or whatever it is in our lives, right? We have to be able to define a problem. And so we could do a whole show, we can have a whole conversation on rightly defining a problem. And so that's the first thing that needs to happen, right? Is that you've got to be able to define the problem. And then we'll expand a little bit on defining a problem. But the second thing you got to do is you got to be able to measure the problem. Like, how bad is the problem? Because here's the thing: if you can't measure it, then you don't really know the extent of it. Like, how bad is it, right? And you could put a lot of resources on solving a problem that really isn't much of a problem. So you might have a problem, but if like, what is the measure? Am I losing money? Like, am I losing $1 million a day? Is that how you measure this problem? Um, is it my health, right? Like, am I shaving time off my life? Um, like, how do you measure this problem, right? That's really, really important. And the problem you have to be able to measure the issue. So you got to define it, you got to measure it, right? And then after the measurement, you've got to be able to analyze the problem, right? You've got to be able to say, all right, so now I know what the problem is. Now that I've measured the problem, right? I've got to analyze. So I've got to understand the trend. Like, when did this problem start? How is it going? What is it related to? Now we're looking for root causes, right? So we're looking for a root cause. What is causing this problem? And there's a whole method that you can go into on root cause analysis, right? And I'll expand on that later. But there's at least five groups or five areas that a cause will fall into, and they begin with M's. It's either your measurement is off, it's either your method, something's gone wrong with the method, the way we do things, right? Am I doing this the wrong way? It could be Mother Nature, right? It could be something completely out of your control that's causing the problem, right? You have no control over it, right? It could be the machine or the tool. Are you using the wrong tool, right? So machine is an important part of that. And even the material, so like usually in manufacturing, this is like material that they'll bring these sorts of things in it. But they have relevance in even in the when we're solving problems for our own lives, that we could look at a root cause and try to figure out like which one of these M's, right, defines the problem that I'm facing, right? So you want to analyze. So getting back to define, measure, and analyze. So the analysis part is where we're going to dig into what the problem is, and so start to figure out the root cause. And then once we've analyzed the problem and we figure out what the root is, now we can implement the solution, right? And that's the implementation stage. And then the final stage is the control, because now once you've implemented a solution, right, you want to be able to monitor that. Like, is it working? Like, are we doing the right thing? And you can do this in a relationship, right? We can talk about that in a relationship. And I think that these five methods work the same way in a relationship. Like, imagine you're with your spouse or your partner, and you've got a problem, but nobody's spending any time to define what this problem is. We just keep fighting over it. Like, can we sit down and have a conversation and talk about what the actual problem is, right? And measure this problem. Like, what's going on? Like, what's it costing us? Like, what's the real issue? and let's do some analysis where we think it's coming from. Maybe you got to go to counseling, right, to help figure that out. You never know, or you just talk it over, right? And then once you know what the issue is, then you can actually implement the solution, and then over time we'll control it. Like we'll check in and see how things are going. So I'll pause there for a sec, Rich. But that's it. It's D for define, M for measure, A for analyze, I for implement, and C for control.
That sounds like a lot of work, my brother. But
Problem solving is a
but
lot of work.
it is, and I guess like as I think about it, I mean, clearly, depending on how severe your problems are, those processes will take a little bit longer, right? But a lot of times,
Right.
one of the things that I like about having a process to do certain things is that if you can do it on a small scale, you can do it on a large scale, right? So
Yes,
if
exactly.
for a
Exactly.
simple example, if you said, I want to save towards a financial goal. I want to buy a new pair of shoes, right? $100.
Hmm.
Here's what I got to do to save it, right? And so if you take that same principle and you say I want to buy a house, that's $20 million. Clearly, that's a lot more money, but it's the same. You could follow the same process. And so I think one of the things that we often end up doing, most of us, is we get frustrated when things aren't the way they should be in our lives, and
Correct.
instead of identifying the problem and defining what the problem is and then thinking about how do we take the next steps, we just throw our hands up in the air and give up, right? Or just blame it on all those things, right? All those causes, um, rather than to look back and sort of analyze the whole problem and solve it. But I certainly appreciate that background there. And I mean, I guess if you follow that method, it should work
Yeah.
pretty well. Um,
But one of the things that people do, in addition to what you just said, is without defining. Some people try to implement the solution without defining the problem. And we do that. We do that a lot with our lives, right? Or sometimes we even do this professionally. So we can talk about it from both perspectives. So in a professional environment, sometimes something will happen, and we might look at some symptoms, and we'd run ahead without defining or trying to figure out what the problem is. We might run ahead and try to put a solution in place, only to realize that later all we did was put a band-aid on the problem, and we never really that was never really a good solution, right?
it's kind of what we do with healthcare a little bit, right? We
Yeah.
identify symptoms and then we treat the symptoms
Exactly, exactly. We
without
don't
going and solving the root cause of the
the root
problem.
cause.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. So sometimes we're tempted because we want to get to the end so quickly to put a solution in place. Um, and oftentimes, what will happen is if the problem wasn't solved, we will see the problem come right back up again. Right? Like the
Yeah.
problem is going to raise. It's like when you're trying to fix a leaky pipe or a leaking system. Even when you see like the water, and you try to stop it, you find the water start coming out somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right? Like it starts moving around. Like you block one hole and you notice it's coming. And you realize, man, like you go and you really analyze it, just like okay, there's probably too much pressure in the system, or this pipe is old. We got to get rid of this pipe, right? We're using the raw material. And so we do that with our lives too, right? Like we run into an issue, like you said. Um, like someone would say, here's a good example, right? Someone would say, um, well, I'm not, I've got a lot going on, so I'm busy, right? I'm very busy. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to stop to analyze why I think I'm quote unquote busy. My solution is I'm going to sleep less. Right. I'm going to sleep less because I got to stay up to get stuff done. But it doesn't really solve the problem, right? Because now you're sleeping less. What happens the next day, right? What happens 2 days after that? You're not just busy now. You're tired. You're busy and tired, right? So you don't solve the problem. So if you take time, if you're a quote unquote busy person, and you stop and you go, okay, this isn't a good thing. I'm missing out maybe opportunities. I'm missing out on time with family, right? This I'm measuring the problem. This is significant. So when I analyze it, I realize maybe I'm doing things that are not valuable. Maybe there's a lot of things I'm calling busy, but they're not really value added. You see, and maybe that's where you want to go about it, right? I want to change how I do things. So it's my method. I'm going to change my method. Well, my method's going to be I'm going to focus on the things that are most valuable to me, my family, maybe my career, and a few other things. And I'm going to cut out certain things, but I'm still going to sleep. And then you implement that, and then you check to see if you get the same result. Did I carve out some time for myself, right? Maybe I try scheduling or something else like that. So I'll start using the right tool in this case, right? So I start using like scheduling and other tools. But that's how you first have to define the problem before you run ahead and try to um, put a solution in place. Yeah.
And it's an iterative process, right? I would think that many times
It is.
you can incorrectly define the problem,
Yeah.
as you
And then you go
highlighted
back.
earlier.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
go through the steps and you realize, okay, when you get to the end and maybe you implement, you have to go back now to the beginning and say, okay, maybe we didn't define the problem correctly. But
Correct.
if you do that often enough, you will get to a point where you're solving the problem
Yeah, and you
and
become
getting
good
the
at
solution you
identifying.
want.
After a while, you become really good. So the thing about this is once you start solving problems systematically, right, and logically, you develop the habit of solving problems. You develop the art, as you're talking about, of solving a problem. And so a lot of people think that maybe it's just a gift, right? But it's a skill that we could all develop if we stop and think about these steps, right? So if you approach it by saying, look, my first thing is like imagine you walking into a boardroom or any meeting and you go, guys, what's the problem? What is the problem? And you're going to spend some quality time trying to figure out what is that problem, right? Because you know what happens? Everyone starts suggesting solutions and you go to some meeting, oh, let's do this. Let's try that. Um, and so, but you're right. If you get it wrong, there's an iterative process because what's going to happen is you're going to go try to put something in place. You're going to do your analysis, and you're going to realize that I don't think we defined this problem the correct way. Again, you're going to have to come back and try to solve it again, right? And so that you're absolutely right. And again, if we apply these principles to our lives, it's the same thing. Whether it's in a relationship or something else, we'll try. We'll see what happens. Trial and error, right? We'll implement more control. That's why that controlling step's important because you'll notice, okay, things are off. We didn't get this right. So let's try again.
Yeah.
Try again. Yeah.
No, I mean I could think of a million different things that happens in our lives every day that we incorrectly define what the problem is, right? And when it comes to things like eating healthy and exercise, some people are like, oh, I just can't resist having all this sweet stuff around the house. That's my problem. I can't resist it. And I was like, I have that problem too. I just don't buy it, right? The
No,
problem isn't that you eat that stuff. The problem is that you have it in your house to begin with, right?
so one of the ends, right? One of the ends. So Mother Nature is one, method is one, right? Machine is another one, measurement is one, material is another one. The final one is man.
That's probably the biggest problem.
Right, right. I didn't say human error, but yeah, the root cause of this is I'm a human being. How
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
fix that?
No, definitely makes sense.
So you have to address, yeah. So it
I,
falls into one of those categories. But go on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm thinking with all my problems in my life now that I have to go sit down and run through this system here.
Right.
I mean, again, not to say that we don't necessarily do some of it already, right? But I think there are
Yeah, we
certainly probably
figure this out.
pieces that we're missing, right? And a lot of times we've got to. I like what you said about committing to a problem solving mindset, right? Because it is a mindset, and we have to keep thinking with it because. I'll give you a simple example. I always assumed that um, when I was younger, if I made enough money and I lived simple enough, I should be able to save money. That's not that's not true. I know
Yeah,
this now, unfortunately. Um, and so we make assumptions about things, and we've got to constantly keep solving for it. I haven't figured out how to save my money yet, but I've done a few things on the way there, and I'm measuring their impact. But there's certainly, I think I have to go back to defining what the problem is,
right,
or
right,
maybe who the problem is. I'm not pointing any fingers though.
right.
No, that's good. I think we should all commit to solving problems. And I'll say this. This is just my experience. I'm not an expert in solving problems by any means, but I will say, Kofi, that I feel like, and I'm sure you can speak with some authority on this. When we develop that problem solving mindset, we just generally tend to live life happier, right? Like we
Yeah,
hit a snag with something, and it's like, man, this is an opportunity here. Let's sit down and figure this problem out, right? Because now you know you can solve it, and so you probably tend to maybe move through life looking like you like
right,
like you're
correct.
like you're blessed and highly favored, and
No,
just solving problems left, right, and center. But it does sort of ease the pressure of things that you feel that you have no control over. Because I think most of what we go through that we think is tough or unfair or unfortunate can be solved. I mean, not all of it by any means, but I think a good portion of our daily struggles is a problem to be solved. That if we approach it with the right mindset and the
yeah,
right
no,
process, life gets easier.
yeah. I mean, you remember the whole prayer, right? Grant me the courage to change the things I can, and serenity to accept the things I can't change, right?
And the
Um,
wisdom to know the difference.
yeah, and wisdom to know the difference. Yeah, I would say in closing, I wouldn't really delve in deep because, like I said, each one of those categories you can really break down and talk about how to define a problem. How do you what kind of language do you use? How you think about the problem when you're defining it, and how you break it up into smaller bits and pieces. So there's a lot that we can talk about later in each one of those steps. So like a problem solving part two, but I really wanted to say that once you start solving, like I said, you really do develop this ability to see a problem and just sort of be excited about solving it. And so all of these things that we talked about just naturally run through your mind, right? So sometimes all of this could happen in like, like in a minute where you've defined the problem, you've already kind of measured it, you've analyzed it, and you're already ready to put a solution in place, sort of like what this girl Vanessa did once we got there, right? So she kind of saw the issue, she saw the vision, what I was trying to do, and immediately was able to say, let's do this. And it worked right off the bat. It just worked. So, and again, like you said, it depends on on the complexity of the problem as well. What I want to say is I think that this is really good even in nation building, right? So we're building a country like Guyana, for example, and there are a lot of people who see problems, right, as opposed to challenges, right? They see these as maybe sometimes unsolvable, and really, each one of these problems that we see, I believe there's a solution, right, for them, right? So it really just takes some time and effort to dig into it, right, and bring some minds together and look at these issues, define them, right? Really starts with defining like what is the issue, and having great conversation and debates about what we really think the issue is, long before we're able to get into a solution. And so I think that this is really helpful, right, across the board, in our personal lives, in our communities, and in our country at large, right? Even the world at large. I mean, this is what people have to do, right? Under solving, world hunger, for example, right? A lot of people think you could just solve that, but it might vary from place to place in terms of the root cause, right? And so you have to look at each of those situations on their own merit and figure out like what is the root cause and how are we going to implement a solution to address those issues. And we certainly could do that with our own lives, with a lot of the challenges that we're facing, sort of every day. We learn that method to solve issues. We'll look at them very differently. We'll look at problems very differently.
Good stuff. Well, I took some notes this evening, Dr. Dalrymple. I appreciate you, my brother. Thanks for
Appreciate
joining
you.
us, everybody. I'm sure everybody's got their own little problems that they've solved. Feel free to share your story or share some tips. Um, I know we have a lot of engineers out there and smart minds that are solving
Yeah,
problems every day,
definitely,
right? And to
definitely.
some degree, everybody's solving some problem in their life every day, right? And
Yep,
so
absolutely.
we all
Yeah,
have the ability to solve problems. I like the fact that you pointed out that it's not necessarily a gift to be able to solve problems. It's sort of once you make up your mind that you
yeah,
can do it, you can make it happen. And I think the internet makes it a little easier to find some process as well.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
All
Yeah, man.
right. Let's solve our problems, make life a little bit better for ourselves and those around us.
All
Have a good
right.
one, everybody.
You guys take care, man. Keep expanding the conversation. Bye.
Bye.